I'm Shane Nyland, and my co host is Blake Musser. And these stories you're about to hear are from Weapons Company, 2nd Battalion, 4th Marines, 1st Marine Division, about the events surrounding and directly from the mouths of the people who were in Ramadi 2004. All right. Well, let's tell everybody who you are and what platoon you were with and what rank you were in 2004.
Yeah, I'm Dave Dobb. I was a first lieutenant back in 2004, and I was the 81's platoon commander, but we had split up for that time into two sections, Sledgehammer and Rainmaker. So tactically, I led the Rainmaker platoon during the 2004 deployment in Ramadi. But during that time, it was kind of a unique relationship. I was also, had administrative control over the Sledgehammer section. So between Gunny Cook and I, we kind of handle things that way.
That's interesting. I didn't know that you had still filled like sort of an administrative commanding officer billet with the other section as well, although that makes sense because they are technically both your platoons.
Yeah, so when it came time for fit reps, fitness reports or, awards writing or documentation of, any type of personnel action, that was, a lot of times I had to,
sure.
We kind of did everything hand in hand, but especially for those things, writing fitness reports or award citations for guys that I wasn't with during that time, had its challenges, but we were close enough during that time that we were able to make that work.
So question for you, how did you guys decide on how did you split up Rainmaker and Sledgehammer? Did Gunny Cook and you do it like softball league style and just pick the best players and then divide up the best, or was there more of a process, or did that come from like higher headquarters? Did they help out with that?
The way I recall it, and I don't have real specific memories with how we did that. It was definitely higher command was not involved in that. It was we got the directive that we were going to split, and I think it was kind of more like almost like a fantasy football draft type of thing, where okay, you get him, but then you get him, but then you get this guy, and we tried to make it, and Blake, you can speak to this too. 81s was a kind of a unique animal, and it always had been for as long as, I could remember being in 2-4. This was my second deployment with 2-4. So even going back to the prior Okinawa deployment, and then even the deployment before that neither of us was on, but we had heard about it. 81s was just kind of 81s was a big animal. I mean, it's the biggest platoon TO wise in a battalion, 60s. I don't remember exactly.
68.
Yeah, it's somewhere right there. So you have a lot of different personalities. So we tried to divide them up, between, personalities, tactical expertise, leadership traits, and all of those things to try to come up with, two units that would be able to function effectively in combat. And I think, and then you would take myself and Gunny Cook because we were different people too. So we tried to get people that would complement each of us and kind of would balance out in the end. And I think looking back at it and thinking about it during the time, because I think we did do some shuffles. We didn't get it exactly right the first time, but I think, due to some casualties and other things over there, I think we did make some trades, but I think all in all, people generally ended up where they started. And I think it was a pretty good balance. You might have something else to say on that, but I think it worked out fairly well.
No, actually, I think I kind of assumed what you outlined is kind of how you guys decided to do that. And I would say that we were, from a intra platoon standpoint, it was divided up a balanced way because as you did know, I mean, not only was Gunny an enlisted guy, but personality wise and whatnot, needing to divide up assets, and I think we functioned pretty well. And actually, the best I can remember, and at least from my vantage point, any of the shuffling was not necessarily due to a poor decisions in the beginning, but more of facing the realities of the environment that we were then in, and like just for example, like the shakeup that we did as a company level, where they started pulling over some people with more other tactical abilities, MOS based, to help us out to make sure that we were more fully rounded.
Yeah, it was along the lines of, we lost a driver or two along the way, so we had to shuffle a driver to somewhere else, or someone else
Right.
needed we need a machine gunner. Okay, I got this guy, and then we need, it wasn't because, oh, this guy can't function with us, or this guy, this platoon is, or this squad is inept, we need to add experience to them. It wasn't anything like that. It was just filling needs based on a constantly changing environment.
No, Nyland and I have joked over the years, even when we were in that, going back to a point that you made, that 81s is definitely and I would be, and not that this is the point of this conversation, but I would be curious if 81s is 81s across battalions, or if 2481s was a unique beast. But we definitely functioned, even before we went over, we functioned very differently. And I don't know if it's because of the size or because of how we run our guns, but we did a lot more. I don't know if micromanagement's the right word, but we were on top of our people a lot more than the other ones. And that's not taking away from the other platoons, but just we definitely were a little bit more intense, and definitely had stronger people that enjoyed using their outside voice to get people to do what they wanted them to do.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of putting it. I don't know if 81s is like that, across the Marine Corps. I think, but I think, I can only speak to how it was in 2-4, as that's the only, unit I had ever been with. But I do remember, checking into the unit. I checked into 2-4 in November of 01, and they had come off a deployment, and then I think it was either maybe post-deployment or during the tail end of the deployment. I don't remember exactly, but they had a pretty good sized hazing scandal in which, a lot of people were removed from spots and relieved of duties and that type of thing. So that stigma kind of hung with 81s, I feel like. So I feel like we were, under a microscope at times, even though, all of the leadership had changed over, everybody knew that 81s, because there were some holdovers, we still had some holdovers in the platoon, that I think that kind of stayed with us. I mean, it stayed with me. I mean, that was always in the back of my mind that, hey, this is the platoon that, had this. And it wasn't all, it was just a different Marine Corps then too. They hadn't done the combat deployment. So I think things were looked at differently. And I don't know I don't know the details of what happened, but those things that happened may not have been a big deal post this deployment. I don't know. But it was just something that was kind of unique.
Yeah, there were definitely 2 Marines that were hurt during hazing incidents. And then around that time frame that you checked in, there was also a relatively large group of Marines who were separated from the Marine Corps due to popping on urinalysis for drugs. And that was across multiple different platoons, but 81s got hit by that as well with a few different people. And so it was just a combination effort.
Yep, and I had checked in. I went to golf company. I had weapons platoon golf company, and we had been dealing with the tail end of some of those drug pops too, who had some of them had still been hanging around for whatever reason. At least one of them had gone UAs. He was still on the books.
Yep.
So kind of dealing with that. It was interesting. And were big issues then. Were too big of issues after our deployment, just because of the environment that we were in. So yeah, I came up for golf company, so I dealt with some of that there as well. But 81s, I think just being, I think there's kind of a bravado with 81s. I mean, it's the biggest platoon, it's the biggest guns, so I think there's just kind of a sense of pride in the battalion, and you kind of walk with a little extra swagger, I think. And I think that is probably true throughout the Marine Corps. I don't know. That was kind of my take on it. Maybe that's because that's where I was at, but that was kind of how I felt about 81s.
Dad was proud of his boys, right? Yes.
I was going to say, I really like that take. That is not the way I would frame it, but I like that a lot.
Shane's probably rolling his eyes, 81, fucking 81s, but Blake knows where I'm coming from.
Yeah, I absolutely. Well, I ended up hanging out with for whatever reason I did about half and half, hanging out with 81s and the rest of weapons company platoons and stuff like that, as they were mixed up throughout the time that I was there. And I definitely had several people from the other companies be like, "So what's up with you guys?" In a very serious, like let's sit down and have a conversation. Now, remind me, sir, when did you come over to 81? So that would have been after Okinawa.
Yeah, after Okinawa, we got back Okinawa 2003, summer of 03, and then that's when a lot of the senior lieutenants had either separated or gone on to B billets, and then the guys that did their first pump on that deployment, they did the big shuffle, and then I ended up going to 81. So it would have been shortly after the return from Okinawa, so probably like August, July, August, September-ish of 2003.
And
that makes sense.
Is there and I know this is a weird question, but is there like a selection process, or do you get to say like, hey, I'd like to go to weapons company, or how does that happen that you guys end up coming to weapons company? Because you were with Golf, I believe, JD Stevens was with Golf as well. And as far as I know, Dan Crawford was with somebody.
JD was with Echo Company.
Yeah.
And Crawford was with Fox Company, I believe.
Okay.
But I was with Golf. I had the weapons platoon, so that kind of made, of course, you get to give your input as to where you would like to go after that first deployment. I mean, the options are kind of weapons company or company XO or 3 Alpha or 3 Bravo, but ultimately, it's not your decision.
Yeah.
They kind of put you where you think you'll be the best fit. And I had gone shortly after getting to Golf Company. They had sent me to the MLOC down at Fort Benning, which is the Infantry Mortar Leaders course. So which is kind of a unique school for us to go to. So I had that.
That's cool.
Under my belt, and having had the weapons platoon for a 12-month deployment, it was just, I had said I'd like to go to 81s. They saw that as a good fit. So
nice.
81s it was.
Yeah, Nyland knows my feelings on the supremacy of mortars on the battlefield. So I think obviously you're a smart man, Dave.
Well, I mean, in hindsight, we didn't get to deploy them a whole lot. So, but anyways, it was a good spot to be at the time, and it was a good place to be. I think weapons company is always a good place to be. We had a couple lieutenants, or at least one lieutenant, that checked into the battalion with me that went right to weapons company as, I believe, the heavy guns platoon commander. So we were all kind of in envy of him for a little while. So I was happy to finally make it to weapons company.
Was that
Nate McFadden?
Oh, McFadden. Yes. Yeah. He was with Cat Platoon. It was a mixed platoon between heavy guns, and he was my platoon commander in Okinawa.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
And I think over in Oki, you guys also hung out with Lieutenant Appert too, if I remember correctly.
Yeah. So he preceded me with 81s. So I got to know John pretty well. He was obviously senior to me in the battalion by probably 12 to 18 months is kind of usually how they gap us. And then he was in that prior wave, and then I had come with a bunch of guys: Stevens, Crawford, McFadden, Califatis.
Oh yeah,
nice.
Barnett. I don't know if Barnett rings a bell. He was in that group too. And then just shortly after that group was Schickel and Rob Scott.
Oh wow, yeah.
They both went to Golf. We were all in Golf Company together back when Lieutenant Gaskell was still the XO. And
so coming into the fall of 03, I know I've heard, General Kennedy now, but talk about the process of knowing that we were more generally on deck, knowing that we were on deck, that we were going to get pushed pretty quickly after Okinawa. But then it was, I think if I remember his story correctly, it was at the Marine Corps ball, so November, finding out that a little bit more specifically where we were going to go. Was there deeper conversations about, well, what does this exactly look like? Here's the training evolution, getting brought into at the battalion level, or were you just holding on tight and giving us good training at the platoon level? What was the planning process?
Yeah,
that you remember?
I don't remember. Yeah, I don't remember a lot of specifics with respect to, we're doing this because this is where we're going. It was more of a generalized, desert type, town environment training that we were going to do. And you can be assured that anything that I was getting behind the scenes, you guys were also getting it. It wasn't, there wasn't this grand plan behind the scenes that was being drawn up that wasn't being shared with you guys, and I realized that sometimes there may have been a lull in communications, and it wasn't because we were withholding it. It was just because we didn't have it. So I know behind the scenes, they were working behind the scenes to come up with the most, realistic training they could. And I do remember doing, well, we went, I don't remember exactly where it was, but they kind of did a mock-up of an Iraqi
March
town. I mean, yep, we did March, and then I feel like we did somewhere else that I think was on Camp Pendleton too. That it was a pretty ad hoc.
That was just out in the backyard, out behind San Mateo. Something that was put on between a couple of battalion assets, but largely Gunny Maraki was involved in getting that organized.
Yep, that sounds right. So just the best things that we could come up with the equipment and time that we had, which we're short on both of those. So I think just giving some, doing the best we could with what we had, and really not knowing, having no way of knowing what we were going into at the time.
Yeah, my memory of that time period was there was a bunch of school slots that had gotten opened up, allowing us to grab slots, and I ended up not training very much with 81s because y'all kept sending me to the I think I went to like five different division schools back to back, all the way up until basically only a few weeks before we actually deployed. You just pushing knowledge so that way we had some people that had at least some frame of reference when we got over there, so we could adapt and overcome. So
yeah, so people like you, and there were others, but we would push you, the people who we thought would be best at coming back and relaying what they learned to everybody else. That's who we would send. I actually went to one. I don't know if you guys were. There was a couple of people from the unit. It was led by Pat Rogers. It was more of a tactical shooting course where we would just go out, and I think I don't know if it was just a week or 10 days, but we would just shoot. We would do shooting drills all day long. And I ended up going to that one because nobody else wanted to go. So I was like, fuck it, I'll go. So I was gone for a week, just showing up and shooting. That way, and it was actually, it's too bad that we couldn't have put the whole unit through that, because really that's what we needed.
I was going to say that's what you had to doing.
I mean, I became pretty damn proficient, with the mag changes and everything. So it's just a repetition thing. So I do remember, due to the upcoming deployment, we got a lot of school slots, and then we just had to, between Gunny Cook and I, we would just have to fill it with who we thought, and then you had other things mixed in. It wasn't just most capable Marines. It was, well, who's on leave, or who has this going on, and all that type of stuff to try to get the people through that would most benefit the whole of the unit.
Now, fast forwarding to the actual Ramadi deployment itself, did you end up driving up from Kuwait, or were you part of the element that flew up and landed in Al Asad?
No, so I drove up, and I don't even know if I came with most of my platoon, because I stayed back. I was one of the last ones to leave, because if you recall, we had a Marine in Echo Company commit suicide.
Yeah.
That's right.
So Milzark, Matthew Milzark, committed suicide. So the battalion needed an officer to conduct the command investigation into that, or the inquiry into that. And that was me. So I had to stay back and interview Marines and formulate that whole
That's interesting.
inquiries.
I didn't realize that was part of your duties, and that's something I would not even have considered. What does that entail doing in the investigation? Just asking everybody sort of the surrounding events?
Yeah, really just interviewing everybody who had interaction with him, who knew him, and then just coming up with a document, showing all the findings of facts that you
Yeah.
found during the investigation. And it's a pretty formal process. It's the Battalion XL. Major Wiley was overall the command representative on that, but it's typically, the responsibility of a junior officer to conduct that. And that is something like a lot of things in the Marine Corps that you don't get a lot of training on.
No, that was gonna be my next question: is what guidance did you get? Because that's a pretty serious investigation to just be thrown into.
Very much so, and it wasn't, it's more of a fact finding mission, not necessarily a this is why it happened type of investigation. But yeah, very, very little. And I think he acquired a go by for me from a case that was, not applicable at all, but it showed me the margins I needed to use and the spacing I needed to have on the document and that type of thing. But I mean, but I took that, it's a serious responsibility, and I spent hours and hours, interviewing people, writing and drafting the document, and ultimately it goes up for approval. And it was a very time consuming process to be doing, just prior to.
I was going to say, especially when you're right about to cross the line of departure and head into a combat zone. It's like, hey, here, take this very serious but very administrative task.
Yeah. So I came up after that was complete. I kind of got on. I think it was about the last convoy up. In the back of 7 tons that came in. I think most of the guys were already up there. It was on the tail end coming up.
So you didn't ride with anybody from your platoon then? So you were just chilling in the back of a 7-ton with other.
Well, I don't know that for sure. I mean, it was definitely all 2-4 Marines. I don't know if it was all of Rainmaker or not.
Yeah.
But it was definitely the tail end. I mean, I do remember riding up there, but I don't remember who I was with. I mean, I remember obviously coming into the city like most people do, and seeing the faces of the locals, the unwelcoming faces of the locals, and
yeah.
And I remember that pretty vividly, but not so much who I was with. I just know that we brought up the tail.
Yeah, I think everybody has well, maybe not everybody, but most people have a story of coming into the market square and just everybody stopping and staring and mostly giving you the stink eye. Like they did not want us there at all. There was zero amount of people who were saying hello.
Yeah, and I think the guidance given to us was to wave and smile, and I think for the most part we tried to do that, but then at a certain point it was like, okay, we look stupid now. Like this is stop. Like this is not being received well. Like let's. That was the plan. That was the plan. But then you adapt to the circumstances, right? So we adapted, and I think the smiles kind of went away and the waving stopped, and we were just kind of.
That was still when our tactical and strategic mindset was hearts and minds,
right?
And that did shift. Not that we weren't trying to get hearts and minds, just in perhaps different ways.
So then you got there and you broke out into separate platoon. Who was in your truck with you, Dave?
Well, Riegelsberger was the driver.
Yep.
And then we had Savage on the gun, and then we had Doc Contreras was in the back.
Mm-hmm.
And I think those were kind of the mainstays. But I think beyond that, I think it changed. I think it changed a little bit depending on the mission or whatever. I don't remember who was always with us, but I do know that those 3 are the most that I had. Those 3 were always there, and I think everyone else maybe fluctuated a little bit.
And then everything got pretty serious pretty fast, right? We rolled up from Kuwait March 6th, and the first serious casualty was a week later with McPherson, and then a week after that was the bike IED that caught Worth in the eye, which was your platoon as well.
Yeah, we got into it pretty quick. And although, McPherson was Gulf Company, he was one of my Marines during that first deployment.
That was going to be my question. Yeah.
Yeah. And he was one that I was, probably, I was closest with him as I was with anybody in golf company. So I think, well, I know that one hit me pretty hard, and it kind of opened my eyes like, holy shit, they got real quick, you know. I knew they didn't like us, but it escalated quickly. So that one, you know, McPherson hit pretty hard, and then just hearing the details of his wounds, you know, that one hurt. And then obviously we go to Worth, which is, he's one of your own, you know, albeit, you know, Sledgehammer, but like I said, he was one of ours. So that hit hard too. But as you guys know, I mean, very little time to dwell on it. You know, you gotta,
Yep.
you know, learn from it and move on. But yeah, it escalated quick. And then right around that time of Worth was when Lieutenant Kaler, the XO, then the XO of Echo Company, was seriously wounded, and he was one of my best friends in the battalion. He was later the best man in my wedding. I was in his wedding, and he was, you know, at the time he was evacuated. We didn't know if he was going to make it or not. And
Yeah.
obviously he ended up making it, but that was right around that same time in March. So we had, you know, multiple casualties then that both hit pretty close to home for me.
Yeah. I don't think people realize how fast it ramped up in intensity, and that's kind of why I brought that up, is that, you know, most people came up on March 6th. There's a few people showed up later, March 7th, 8th. March 13th was McPherson's jaw blown off, and then the 20th was Worth being blinded, losing an eye. And then Fox Company had a Marine killed from an RPG attack, and it may not have been Rainmaker, but it was Sledgehammer, I believe, went out to that as the response.
Yep, I think you're right.
And yeah, and then March 25th was when Echo Company was able to ambush those guys with all the mortar gear. And then right after that, on the 26th, was when the mosques started calling for killing of Americans, and everything escalated from there. You had obviously the Blackwater contractors killed in Fallujah, and then everything started getting wild shortly thereafter. To my and this is just me remembering, moving forward to the actual Battle of Ramadi, Map 1 was out and in the south of Ramadi and did that cordon and knock and caught Adnan Farhan, and then Golf Company was ambushed off of Easy Street, and Map 3 went out first, but you guys went out second. Is that correct, Dave? You went out and backed up Map 3 and Golf Company in the south of the city?
Now, what date are you talking?
This is April 6th, the first day of officially of the Battle of Ramadi.
Yeah, so the 6th, we were out, and I think our first link up was out at the government center.
Okay.
I think it started right in the vicinity there. Golf was pretty heavily engaged by the government center, and we were called there to reinforce Golf Company. And we had evac a couple casualties back to the combat outpost. And then we met up with Colonel Kennedy and Major Harrell down there as well. And then we headed up to Echo Company, that's when Echo Company was surrounded up north of Route Nova.
Yeah, around Route Nova. That was when you guys, I remember you showing up and joining up with us around Route Nova.
Yep. So I think we ended up in the city, and then we ended up pushing up north to the river to assist them.
Now I'm curious. I'm curious, when you're around the government center and they were ambushed, did you guys meet heavy resistance? This is where, while I really appreciate that book, Unremitting, I really think it's a great depiction of everything that happened with Golf and Echo Company. I feel like I saw you quoted in there a couple of times, and then it just sort of falls short of any sort of description of what happened.
Yeah. So when we rolled up on the 6th, they were not heavily engaged at that time. Now they had been, but when we showed up, you know, it had largely dispersed, and there was, you know, periodic pot shots and that type of thing, but there wasn't heavy engagement at that time.
Okay.
And then we did assist in evacuating some casualties, and then we had gone to and from the city out to combat outpost a couple times, and each time, you know, going back and forth, we had encountered some resistance. So I remember, you know, Savage was, you know, on top of the gun at that time, and we were having to fight our way back and forth a little bit, but I wouldn't call it heavily engaged.
Okay. Nothing that stopped your progress anyway.
Nope. It was like we're moving. Hey, look, you know, one behind the hill, and then we would suppress it and kind of move on as we were trying to get the casualties back. And then we linked up with the CO and OPSO there in the city, and then we linked up and went north.
Yeah. That was, I remember that specifically on the 6th that you guys showed up when where the snipers and some of the QRF from Echo Company were pinned down on the north end of Nova, and we ended up stealing your vehicle specifically, and Riegelsberger as the driver to evac those guys off to Junction City.
Yeah, and actually, as I'm thinking this out, and I should have known this, when we linked up and we headed north, it wasn't Colonel Kennedy, it was Colonel Captain Weiler at the time.
It was Captain Weiler. Yeah, Captain Weiler was the one in the north. Yeah.
Yeah, I misspoke on that, but yeah, it was directed by Kennedy and Harrell, but it was Weiler that we linked up with and headed north.
And so once you guys came through the Sophia district, I remember very distinctly when you guys pulled up, because I don't know, I was surprised that you arrived. I expected you to get hemmed up long before you ever got to us. You didn't meet any resistance coming up through the Sophia district at all?
No, not that I recall. And even when we got up there on Route Nova and we were pushing to the east, and then we had and then we had word that people were missing and that type of thing. So that's when we dismounted and kind of pushed off. I mean, there was some resistance and we provided some suppressive fire, but
yeah, there was sort of that last push by the insurgents at that point where there was, I don't know, 3 or 4 guys that had come through the field. But you're right. It was not heavy resistance in any way by the time we got to those guys that were missing.
Yeah, I know we kind of came in guns a-blazing, and I think a lot of people were happy to see us.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Which was usually the case when we showed up.
Yeah. And then we ended up linking up with, there was 2 Bradleys that came rolling down from the east side of Nova. And that was when all the evacs started happening. And I don't know who else evac'd people, but I know we stole your highback, and my truck and your highback went and evac'd 2 of the snipers and someone else, a 3rd person, but I don't know who he was with.
Yeah. And I think that's when Colonel Connor, from the
Army,
unit, from the Army, he was out there, and the fact that this is a whole different topic, but the fact that you referenced the highback, the fact that we were rolling around in highbacks is just insanity. as we found out, and we knew at the time, but that's just one of those things that you just didn't know. You go with what you have, and
it lightly speaks to you in that you chose to be in a highback out of all the vehicles you could have chose to jump into. I don't know that I would choose to be in a highback. I definitely would have been in a highback, but I don't know that I would choose it.
Yeah, and I don't know that I chose it either. But it was, we had the plywood over top, right over our heads, up in the cabin. I don't know if that was supposed to provide some level of protection or not, but then we had the L-shaped doors that were on, and then we had some iron on the back that, a lot of that was acquired in Kuwait, and Savage kind of led that effort of basically dumpster diving what the Army had left behind.
Yep.
And finding what we could use and affixing it to our vehicles, which it was genius at the time, and we didn't know how much we needed it, but it wasn't a lot, but it was something, so, and then over time we found that, those vehicles were not equipped to handle all of the added weight that we had been.
No, they all looked like they were bow-legged going down the road as the suspension collapsed.
Right. And then at some point we got actual doors to go on them, with the thick glass windows, I think, that were actually made to go, provide some level of protection too. But again, that really, took its toll on the vehicles over time.
Yep. Yeah, the original thinking with the plywood tops over the top of the canvas in the highbacks was that if you had to fire to the rear, there was no possible way for the gunner to jump, because the way the pintle mounts were, there was no possible way for the gunner to jump up on that roof without falling through. And so we screwed plywood onto the top we didn't have anything else. We had a whole stack of 20 sheets of construction grade plywood and a saw. And we were like, well, this is what we have. And so we put it on.
Like I said, you go with what you have. That's what we did.
And then moving forward from there, this is my memory. Again, you tell me. But April 7th, as far as I recall, Map 3 was the first out the gate. And our XO, Lieutenant Wells, went out with Map 3. And there was some fighting down in the south of the city near the soccer fields, and you guys were second out the gate, but not long after. I mean, it was minutes after, 30 minutes, 45 minutes, and then you were out the gate.
Yeah, we were pretty quick, and I don't recall specifically them going out first, but I do remember that we went out pretty early. Golf Company was heavily engaged down south, so we were called to reinforce them, and we head out, headed east, and then we took that right going down. I believe it is Sunset, and I'm in the lead vehicle, and then we banged that. It's kind of a soft left that you turn, and we got about 2 or 3 vehicles had made that turn, and then just gunfire erupted, and we had been ambushed by medium machine guns right off our left flank. There was a house, a compound with a gate around it that they had a medium machine gun set up behind, and they just opened up on us. And it was, initially just, you're that close. It's, the noise is just, paralyzing. And all of a sudden, we were, almost instantaneous in our response, and Savage especially, because I distinctly remember his gun about 2 feet behind my ears just started going off, and everybody else in turn just, immediately responded. And it felt like a lifetime, but it was probably 10 or 15 seconds, and the dust had kind of settled. And a lot of the guys had, we had, dismounted, and they were pushing north, and I was down on the road. I stayed down on the road. I was on the radio trying to communicate back what had happened. I didn't really know what had happened at the time, except that we were ambushed. But obviously our mission there was to help golf, to back up Golf Company. So we were, although we had immediate situation we had to deal with, our priority, was still to get the Golf Company. So as soon as our situation there was rectified, we shifted our focus back to getting to Golf Company. So that was kind of our first, we had some sporadic contact up until then, but that was kind of the first
big sustained ambush.
First big sustained contact that kind of really created that fog of war that, you read about, you talk about, but you can never really simulate until it happens. It's kind of like the Mike Tyson quote that everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face. So that was that for Rainmaker specifically.
So that's a perfect transition and segue to something I really wanted to ask you specifically. So you ended up being basically attached to the truck because that's where your radio was. Did you find it hard to do sort of a command and control because you had very limited assets? Like we didn't have drones. Most of us did not have GPS devices. I think we got a Blue Force tracker very late in the deployment, and we only had one. There was just so few things, and we had those, printed paper maps, but otherwise trying to figure out where other units were and what was going on was difficult, at least for me. I'm curious what your perspective was.
Yeah, no, it definitely was challenging. I mean, because I was near that vehicle all the time. I mean, really for the radio purposes. And, I think tactically, I think it probably made sense for me to be by that vehicle, but I didn't really have a choice because, communication is so key, because when what do they always say? Lack of comms that's a leadership issue, so you have to maintain comms at all costs. So if I'm a couple hundred meters away from the radio and I needed to communicate, or someone needed to communicate with me, that was on me. So it definitely put a level of restraint, but I think most of the time, I think that's where I would have been anyway, because that's kind of how our platoon, we were within an earshot of the vehicle most of the time. I mean, whether we were doing the satellite patrolling through the city or, dismounted, clearing a house. I mean, we were typically fairly close to a vehicle anyway.
Yeah.
I mean, we were a little different than the line companies in that we weren't just out there with one vehicle and 35 Marines or something like that. We were, the vehicle was kind of our hub of operations, I guess.
Right. And so then going forward from there, it's, we had the Operation County Fair on April 8th. It's sort of a small scale cordon. I don't remember specifically what Rainmaker's portion was of that, but I know that there wasn't really much sustained contact as far as that goes. There were some weapons recovered. There was quite a few field hospitals found. But then April 10th was the first bug hunt, was what they named it, and that was up north in the Sophia district. What was your understanding of what was going on that day?
Yeah, so what I recall on that is we had a pretty specific cordon area that we were supposed to hold, and we did meet some resistance going out there. I don't think it was initial, but I think it was after the sun came up. I remember moving down the road, and I remember distinctly that, there was a guy popping out with an RPG, and he missed. And then we saw him, though, and Garcia, Sergeant Felix Garcia, who was my platoon sergeant at the time, had seen him, and he said something to me like, essentially, hey, I got him next time he comes out. And it wasn't long after that he did pop out. Garcia shot him. He shot it, and he had him. And then as we kept on moving up, we followed the trail of blood into the house, and he was in some type of closet in a bedroom, and he was still alive at the time. And I just remember, and I think that this is written pretty well about in the book on remitting, and that I was standing over him, and then he grabbed my weapon, and it's something that sticks with me to this day that I'll never forget, is the amount of the will to fight that he still had, even though he was, ended up being so close to death. He grabbed the muzzle of my weapon, and I, went to jerk it away, and his whole body came up, and I ended up having to use to basically foot stomp him to let go of my weapon. And if, I was a pretty good sized guy, and it took everything I had, to get him off of the muzzle. And then we ended up moving him back to one of the Humvees, for transport to an aid station. But I think he expired prior to that. So that's something that sticks in my mind that day. And then as we continued to push up north towards the river, we had located a field hospital that you referenced. And then there was a sporadic contact still towards the river and north. And I just specifically remember, Hodges being up there. And then we had Lioness units with us that day. They were one of the first Lioness units to actually go out in Iraq. And I believe they were soldiers, I believe.
Yeah, that was the only ones I saw were all Army. And I am curious, did you have any say on picking who went or anything like that? I never knew how the Lioness teams got picked and then who they rode with, because they almost never rode with my platoon. And it seemed like they rode with you guys in map 3 a couple of times. And
I don't think we had I don't recall having a say. And I mean, they may have said, hey, are you open to this? And of course we were open to it. I mean, especially, we had Hodges with us, so you think he's going to turn down some women coming out with him, I think most of the guys would have welcomed that at that time, and I think they had met them prior to going out, and they were pretty gung ho and motivated, and when we got out there, they backed it up. They were definitely an asset. They were an asset for the intended purpose of, being able to search females and all of that type of stuff. But when it came time that they had to pick up a weapon and use it, they were competent to do that as well. So I think all in all, it was a success.
There's a staff sergeant. I feel like maybe Erin, maybe was her name. I can't remember, but I remember that she was solid, and a couple, when things went down, there was no concern that she was going to be a warrior also.
Yeah, I think we feel the same way.
I imagine there was a lot of pressure, and they probably only took people who specifically wanted to go outside the wire. And so there's a little bit of a self-selection process, or at least there had to have been. And they all seem very ready to participate.
Yeah, I would imagine they had a screening process, and I don't know what was said to them behind closed doors, but it was something to the effect of, if you fuck this up, it's never going to happen again, type of thing.
Yeah.
This is the one chance.
Yeah, so, you have the entire female population riding on your shoulders.
No pressure.
Actually, So actually, the Lioness that made me popped in my head is kind of another support element that we had some crazy ups and downs with, and I felt just because of my relationship of how I was dealing with them. But the interpreters, what were your relationships with the interpreters? And I guess what I'm specifically thinking of is that the first set that we got, I think half of them were bad dudes, and they ended up all getting taken out in one way or another. And then we had another round that were Moroccans who they spoke Moroccan, and so they were as worthless as somebody that didn't even speak Arabic. And then we ended up with a good handful of, you had Rocco and Kazim or Wilbur, and then Danny, I think the other guy's interpreter's name was. But I know some platoons ran more heavy with interpreters than others. I don't know what Rainmaker did.
Yeah, we didn't really have an assigned one. I think we would grab one when one was available and we needed one. I mean, I remember Rocco well because he was kind of the main company one, and I remember Wilbur. But I didn't, I read these books and listen to these things about these guys that, they brought their interpreter to the United States and all this stuff, which is all great. But I just didn't have any type of relationship with any of them like that. We didn't have the same one consistently. I mean, we just, as you recall, we didn't have enough of them. So you would kind of, if one was available, you would grab them. But if not, you would just go with what you had. So I never really developed a close relationship with any of them.
Did you end up having anybody in the platoon that went to that Arabic school or picked up Arabic over there that helped you navigate some of the language barriers? Or do you not feel like a lot of your missions required you to have that level of interaction that required you to talk?
I think going over there, that was kind of the thought that it would be really beneficial. And I think it is to some extent, but I think the vast majority of our missions, for what our missions turned out to be, it really wasn't needed. And you look at some of these, the line companies kind of had a specific AO that they were dealing with, right? So they were dealing with a lot of the same people day in and day out. And I think that might have been, more beneficial to them to have someone to really communicate with. But whenever we went out, we were in the whole city. So our AO was the entire city. So we were in a different place every day. We weren't seeing the same people. So, I don't think we were really some of those relationships that some of the companies may have had. And we were not on foot either most of the time, right? So we're driving by, and I think our engagement with people was probably less than the line companies.
That makes a lot of sense. Oh no, it does. My perspective is just slightly different, just because I did get sent to the Arabic school, when then I kind of got pushed into being a little bit more of a forward facing. And so my relationship, and so now that you've described it that way, I'm realizing now that, especially as a weapons company, all those interactions that I was having where I was trying to communicate was because I was sent out on a hit or was a part of a door element during bug hunts and stuff like that, where I was being asked to be an extra liaison. So that makes a lot of sense.
And it's not to say that it wasn't beneficial when we had them, or there wasn't a use for them with us, because there definitely was. We had times that we were doing cordons, we were doing searches, we were going into multiple houses. So it was, when we had it was beneficial, but I felt like it wasn't necessarily, mission essential all of the time. We weren't gonna wait or postpone a mission to get an interpreter, because we had enough people that I think could communicate what we needed to get across without having.
Sure. That makes sense.
Speaking of interpreters, now a memory popped in my head that one of the two of you, and I believe it was Rainmaker, was on the inner cordon element, and we had a new interpreter. I don't remember his name. I do remember he was from Detroit. He was not from...
No. So go ahead. Okay.
And for whatever reason, someone made the command decision to allow the interpreter to carry a gun. And he shot himself in the foot and shot an Iraqi police person while we were on the cordon. Do you happen to remember that, Dave?
I do remember that. And that was right outside of a large mosque over by the soccer stadium. Does that ring a bell?
Yeah.
100%. 100%.
I should know them because I remember there was lights. There was lights flashing, and I remember it, but I don't remember all of the specific details. But I do remember that. That was not my decision to give him the gun. I will say that.
Yeah, good.
So I actually, I do have a few more details because Sledgehammer was there also. I think it was a bigger move that we were doing because we were actually making. It was one of the first times that we were going to try to make an official entry into a mosque,
into a big mosque,
into a big mosque.
Yeah.
And so we pulled out quite a few elements, and we had taken every last interpreter that we could muster because we wanted them to go in as an element, more or less. And what had happened was a couple of them, I think it was Rocco, and I can't remember who all was a part of the first, I think there was 6 of them. And they were going in, and there was another interpreter that we had given them a video camera because we wanted them to videotape inside the mosque. And he was so excited about using a video camera because he'd never used one before and all this other stuff. And he was really jazzed about it. And he was chatting with whoever was giving him the video camera and then realized that everybody had already gone inside. And so he went and ran inside to catch up with everybody and surprise the interpreter that was carrying the weapon. And he had his finger on the trigger and just and he leaned back, and the rise of the shots shot him in the foot, shot, and then the Iraqi policeman ran out of the mosque with 2 fractured shins and ran. We had to catch him real quick because we didn't understand what was going on.
Yep.
And that interpreter that got shot in the foot ended up sticking around for a little while until his foot got really infected, and then had to get medevaced out. But
he was getting enough money to where he refused to be evac'd. He specifically said he was worried about the paycheck being cut, and he got such a nasty infection he had to leave because he was going to die. That I remember because we had to take him to the medical. We took him to medical.
Yeah, that all jives. I remember he had the video camera, and when the shots went off, I remember the video camera was going all willy-nilly, and lights were flashing all over the place, and everyone's like, "What are you doing? Flashing the lights!" And it was the video camera. Before the days of the smartphones and all that, not by much, but no, we didn't have that. We didn't have that stuff.
No, there was a handful of us that had. I had a small camera, and I know a handful of other people did too, and so we were able to record some stuff. Not like it was not like some of the towards the end of the war with people just having straight up GoPros.
Right.
So what else what else kind of on that, we're talking about kind of hitting the mosque. Do you have any other any missions stick out to you of coordinated, hey, here's your grid coordinates, go hit it? Whether they were, there's always that mix of hey, this was tactically sound, this was an awesome mission, we got what we wanted, we did it really good, and then the absolute boondoggles that can happen. Any stickouts in your mind?
Not mission wise, really. I mean, another event that kind of sticks out, and I don't recall the date, but it was a night. We were on a night patrol, and it would have been vicinity behind the snake pit, which is where Fox Company was.
Yep.
And we were moving, and we hit a pretty good size IED, and that was one of the first IEDs that we hit. I mean, we had the machine gun fire and stuff, but we had, I think that was really the first IED at nighttime, and that nighttime always adds in a different element. And
is that the one that Holmes got hurt on?
That's when Holmes, and that's when Hurley was pretty mangled as well.
Yep.
And I think probably some others. And that's one that kind of sticks out to me too, as just being, chaos, because you just, it's dark, nobody can see, you don't know where it came from. And then, you have the obvious issue of, well, is that the only one? Is there going to be direct fire, coming next, as we're trying to figure out where everybody is, how badly hurt everybody is. And then we have a vehicle disabled, which adds to it, where you can't just leave the vehicle. So we were stuck there for a pretty long period of time because we had to wait for someone came out to help us recover the vehicle. And I don't even
it was map 2. Yeah, we came out. Yeah,
Okay.
I remember specifically. We came out, brought out, I think we didn't bring anybody. We didn't call any wrecker or anything. We just used one of the tow bars and towed that thing out of there because it was still rolling.
Yeah, so that stands out to me. And, again, I don't know exactly what our mission was that night or if we had one other than was to prevent people from placing IEDs along the main avenues. And, but yeah, there's a few other moments that kind of stand out. But I mean, the missions themselves don't really stand out. I guess it's more of, what results trying to accomplish the mission that kind of stands out.
Now, as far as when your platoon took casualties, does that fall on you to pack gear, write the family, that kind of stuff, or does that fall on higher than you? Was that on Captain Weiler?
Yeah, no, that was that is on the platoon commander. Now certainly the captain, the company commander, has his own things that they do. But like when we lost Savage, for instance, I mean, he's the only one that we lost.
Yep.
I wrote the family and did all of that. And so, yeah, that's definitely something that.
Not trying to twist the screws, but I am curious, how did you prepare for that? How did you do that? Because that's something I definitely didn't have to do.
Yeah, it's hard, and I don't know that there is a way to prepare for it because I knew Savage well. I mean, like McPherson, I mean, I know he was a junior Marine too, but like you're close, you're naturally just closer to certain people depending on, what happens during the pre-deployment process, and you're just kind of, there's certain, he was the machine gunner in my vehicle, so I was with him all the time. I had met his wife prior to the deployment, so I knew the family, and just having to write that, and your job is to, the mission is to bring everybody home, and when you don't do that and you have to convey that to their family, it's it's difficult, obviously, and there's nothing that I don't think there's anything that can prepare you to do that, especially when I was at the time 22 to 24, and I'm 26. So, I mean, we're contemporaries, as far as that goes. So, I mean, I didn't have any life experience that prepared me to do that.
Right. Of course.
Of course, I had Captain Weiler to lean on and that type of thing. But I think I just, when I wrote the letter, it was just, you just try to do it from the heart, and just you don't want to beat around the bush with what happened.
Reading Unremitting, that was one in the first part of the book. It was I don't remember exactly why, but it struck me kind of going over how the ages of everybody and how young we were, but at the same time there's like a time warp while you're in, because I was 23 at the time, but anybody that was in their late 20s seemed like a grandpa. It's like, oh, these are sage individuals that have all this life experience, but they're actually only like 5 years older than you. And was that a little bit of a different feeling for perspective, especially since being an officer, you would have gone through college, and so you would have had a little bit more worldliness underneath your belt. And so did you sense that distance in age as much as I was describing there, or were you seeing kind of like, oh no, this person's only 2 years younger than me?
Yeah, I know what you're saying with the time warp. I mean, everyone seemed old. I mean, I remember, Gunny Cook seemed old, and he was, I don't know what he was. I mean, he was probably 29.
I was to say 28, 29. Yeah.
Like he was a young staff NCO, and then you had people like, Staff Sergeant Coleman at the time, who was a little older, and Gunny Crutcher at the time were a little older, and I'm talking like probably
33.
They were probably 32 or 33.
Yeah.
Grizzled at 30.
But that's some hard miles on them, But then you have the guys that you look at like Mann or Escalante, and it's like a lot of times it's that physical appearance, like, holy shit, like this guy is legit, like maybe 18.
Right.
Like, but they look even younger. Some of the guys we had, I mean, the young ones that we did have we had some young looking guys.
Oh, no.
So I think with that, I mean, it's like, yeah, I'm a lot older. I'm a lot more seasoned than this guy. But then you got the guys that have that, for some reason that one deployment makes everybody that much just salty, So like you guys, I I kind of viewed as, we were kind of one and the same basically as far as age goes. I mean, yeah, Blake, you said you were 23 or whatever.
I mean,
but yeah,
I was your age. I was 26. We were the same.
So we had Wade, was in there, and then Esquivel was a little bit older, in Hodges. So like there was a lot of us that, it wasn't me being 26 with, 60, 18-year-olds by any stretch.
Sure.
But Marine Corps years are definitely different than
they're like dog years.
For sure. Yeah. So, but it's just funny looking back on it that, he was a seasoned veteran, he was the old man and he's 28, But yeah, no, just going back to Savage, I mean, that's something, May 12, I mean, that's something that forever will, and you talk about losing people and stuff, but until it happens, there's really no way to prepare anybody for it. And then obviously communicating that with the family is just, one of the hardest things that I've had to do.
I could imagine that there's everybody has their own little silos. And, we've talked to some guys who were gunners or drivers, and they only saw it through that perspective. It is exquisitely different when you are in charge, and much of it falls on your shoulders. And then you have to do something like contact the family, which you don't really have any pre-existing relationship with, even if you met them. That weight has to be high.
If you like what you've heard, this is a multi-part episode. Make sure you listen to the rest of the story.